Brandon, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to speak to you.
Hey, thank you for having me on, man. I'm really excited to share some wisdom with your audience.
Oh, well, I'm sure you've got plenty of wisdom to share because, I've been lucky enough now to hear you speak a couple of times at different events and obviously listen to your podcast and stuff. And I must admit, you're one of the perfect people, really, for me to get on this podcast because I think in many ways you're such an archetype of sort of what I'm trying to present in terms of what I'm trying to put forward. And that is essentially we're looking for the recipe to try and get the best out of yourself in the service of others. And that is something that I think that you sort of seem to do quite naturally. But I thought if you could just start by humouring me for a second with a bit of a hypothetical. Because, you've got a very interesting bio. Our listeners would have just heard that. But if we were to, for example, think of going along, I know you're married at this stage, don't have kids yet, but for example, if you were to go along to a take your parent to work day at school or something like that, how would you describe what you do in that situation?
Take your parent to work there. Fuck,
Yeah.
that's a good one. Let's see. What I do is it's a little different prior to COVID. If COVID hadn't happened and prior to that, what I do is I travel the country, sometimes the world, in terms of speaking to audiences. I produce my own video content and shows that I have, and I advise companies and entrepreneurs at a higher level and helping them build their brand influence online, helping them generate more revenue. So once COVID hit, the speaking publicly wasn't happening, so it's all in the Zoom thing. But what happened is I actually did more of the consulting and advising, so working with companies in terms of helping them raise money for their company, helping them get strategic relationships that gets them their product out to bigger outlets, and making connections that make money. And so that's a lot of the stuff I'm doing now. But before COVID, what it would look like is you would get in with me in an airplane every day, every week. We would fly to a cool city. I'd go speak on a stage. I might do dinners. I get to meet people afterwards, and then I'd go to the next city. And then now and every day is, I guess it wouldn't be that cool because you just come hang out with me in my office all day on nonstop Zoom calls. This is what am I on the 10th call today? Back and forth and going on Zoom calls and connect with people from around the world.
Oh, well, it's such a fascinating way that you do things that I find because to me it seems such a modern way of doing things and there seems to be such a focus on relationships. And so for me, what I find really interesting is, you grew up in, I believe, Garnerville, Iowa. So small town.
You're right.
Yeah.
You said it right. Oh my God.
So
Wow,
small
you
town of
win.
a small town of 750 people, not necessarily a huge community. I believe Clayton County, where you grew up, didn't necessarily have any traffic lights at the time. So where do you think you got that, I suppose, drive to really meet so many people, connect with so many people, and form those relationships?
I wanted to get the hell out of my small town. I grew up in an ice business with my dad, so I worked with him in the ice business, and I did a lot of like grunt work, hard work, and but I I knew I wanted to do more than just be in this small area, and I needed to get out and see the world. And so what I did is after living in Iowa, I had moved to a big city, Des Moines, Iowa, which is big for that city or that state, anyways. And then I knew once I had grown, like, where I thought I kind of knew everybody in that area, and I'd kind of grown as much as I could in that city. Then I went to Florida, and then I went to all these different cities, and then I realized I needed to have a network, not just in a state, but not just in the country, but internationally as well. So I had to get the hell out and grow myself. I can't be defined in one area. I was actually just back in Garnavillo a couple days ago, but it's I wanted to grow, and I think if in this world today that we have the ability to connect with people like yourself in Australia, or people in the U.S., or people all over the world, it is ideal for us to be able to connect via Zoom. But the reason why I travel so much and the reason why I go around and meet people is because that in-person interaction, nothing will be any different than that. If I meet you in person, I show you who I am, we shake hands, we have a conversation, we're going to find a way to work together. That happens on Zoom too, but there's something to be said of that person. You can read somebody even better. And so that's why I like doing these in-person meetings with people around the country. And once I saw that, I started opening my mind what's possible. So I guess, why did I leave? I wanted to expand my growth. And you can only do so much in a small town because some of those people never left that county and won't ever leave that county.
So that's really interesting to me because, as you mentioned there, you obviously work with your dad in his ice business, and as we'll sort of get into it, eventually bought that ice business later on. But it's interesting hearing you describe that there, because it seems to me that although you were obviously really committed to working with your dad and working through summers, I believe, and all that sort of thing, and living a bit of the entrepreneur life from a younger age sort of thing, but it seems to me from what you're saying there that you always had a bit of a sense that you sort of wanted to kind of move on and go somewhere else from there.
Yeah, so I didn't always know, but I always knew I wanted to take over the family business, which I had bought from my dad. But while in the process of doing that, I had also got into the corporate side of business. So I was working for the small business called Adams Ice Service, our last name, Adams Ice Service. And then we had Arctic Glacier Ice, which was a company that we had bought ice from because we were a wholesale distributor. So what I did is I joined corporate while working in the family business. And so at one point I was managing 8 facilities in the state of Iowa. So I covered the whole state of Iowa. And so at that point, when I saw like I was at a pretty high level of selling ice for a living, and I saw how much hard work it was, I saw the grind behind it, and I saw how much I could make, which wasn't near as much as I could have made in other areas. I realized this isn't what I want to do the rest of my life. I wanted to use my head, my brain, not my back. And so that's where I started thinking about what else can I do? And so where that kind of sprang my first endeavor was I had this idea called Arctic Stick, an invention. And so I invented this product to supplement the products I already had in the ice business. So I invented the product, got patents, trademarks, and sold it online. But I never actually made a lot of money with that endeavor. But what happened is that endeavor led me to a thing called crowdfunding, fundraising. And fundraising led me to video production and doing TV shows. So I guess the whole point is like you try different things. It might lead you to something you might not ever imagine. And that's what opened my doors to think outside the box, think outside doing something in a state or in this one business. How could I do something that could be a much higher level for me to make more money, but also be smart with what I do? And that goes back to relationships. The key to what I would consider my success in business is being able to add the right relationships in my corner, connecting with the right people, cultivating them relationships, adding value to them. Just like we're doing a podcast show right now. In 2015, I started podcasting. The core reason of me starting a podcast show was, yes, to build my own audience, but I wanted a way to learn from very influential people. And so what I did is say, hey, come on my podcast show instead of, hey, can I pick your brain? Because influential people don't care to hear that. They get to hear it every day. So for me, I would drive across the country, get a 1-hour meeting with these people, set up my podcast mics and everything, build a connection. And these people ultimately became people I did business with and do business with today. So that was kind of my strategy behind it. And that's where I've really got opened up. When you're around people, and as you know, like when you talk to other people that are doing big things, it gives you ideas and a breath of like fresh inspiration and thinking bigger that makes you think, wow, like this guy's got some cool insight. Like I want to do this for myself. So yeah, podcasting was a big part of that. It really opened up my doors in terms of relationships and also thinking outside the box.
Well, I'm certainly very excited to have a bit more of a chat to you about that in a little bit because on this podcast, one thing that I'm trying to encourage everyone to do is to start a podcast for themselves. And even if it's for, not to grow a big audience or any of this sort of stuff, I know in my experience anyway, just growth and development you get from yourself in terms of wondering what you're going to put out there, who am I going to talk to, what am I going to say, why am I going to say it, sort of thing. You're certainly someone who I've learned a lot off in terms of the value of podcast. But before we get there, I just want to go back to that time when you said you were working in corporate and you had the idea for the Arctic Stick. So one of my favorite quotes of all time is a Friedrich Nietzsche quote, and it's, he who lives for the why can bear almost any how, or can bear any how. And to me, you're someone who really lives that principle in many ways, in terms of, I believe that when you were in corporate working with that ice company, part of what you were doing was trying to formulate that relationship to then be able to, for example, sell your product through them, the Arctic Stick.
Yeah,
Yeah, so could you just
yeah,
speak
you
to
know
that?
my story well.
But could you just speak to that a little bit in terms of, obviously you had this sort of grand goal, maybe involving the Arctic Stick, but you, I suppose, in pursuing that, you didn't necessarily do sort of things that you were, I suppose, wanting to do all the time, in terms of you felt that you maybe needed to build up your skills in other areas to serve that goal?
You are 100% right. So what I did is I had the invention, and there was two reasons I wanted to work in corporate. One is I wanted more leverage and more knowledge in the ice business at a highest level, because we were a small business, ice business, my dad and I, and a few employees. But in corporate, I was managing areas of large cities. Like we at one point, like I was overseeing, I had been in an ice truck and I was basically in almost every town in the state of Iowa, which is big. And so like I saw what it was like to basically be in somewhat control of the whole state of Iowa. And so that was giving me a knowledge and experience. And I knew once I did the corporate job that I would only do it for a short time. I wanted to gain my experience, and that's it. Because I was the kind of person that never wanted to work for anybody. So that was one reason. But the second one is, you're right. I wanted to gain a direct connection to the CEO, and I wanted to pitch him and selling Arctic Stick, because you think of Arctic Glacier Ice, that's how I got Arctic Stick, to pitch him the concept of selling my product throughout the whole distribution, which they were the largest in the country. And so I eventually, like within 12 months, I was already like sitting at the dinner table with the CEO. I was with the main people, and I was talking with them about, like, I even showed them my invention. Like but I was so unhappy with what I was doing, and that was my intention, but it went a different direction. I literally got to the point where I said, screw this, I'm leaving corporate. I left, and I pursued my own endeavors and my own business outside the ice business, but also doing things with Arctic Stick and other things. But I wouldn't change it, because I learned so much working for corporate. I think a lesson for people to take away is sometimes you have to do things that maybe you don't ideally want to do, but it will support what you really want to do. And so if you can use that for leverage on what you really want to do, and a guidance, advice, and to really make that sacrifice in the short term to get to where you want to go, that's what I did. It's worth it. So sometimes you got to do that. And I had to do it early on. I was 23 years old, 22, whatever, 22 years old. And so I did that at a young age. I'm glad I did. Now, 8 years later, I learned so much from it, and it got me so much knowledge for where I am today.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, it's interesting. And just help me with the chronology of this, because your college experience was obviously a fascinating one as well. So when you worked in corporate, was that after college?
It was. So I graduated from college in 2012. I had developed the invention while at college. I had won this class competition. And then after college, the May of 2012, I got a mentor, Cactus Jack manager. I hired him to be a consultant of mine. And then it was literally that fall. So like I went back home. I had a house I built. And in 2012, that year again out of college, I went into business with my father. At that point, I owned a percentage of the company, not the full business. And so I worked with him. And then what happened is this job came up to work in Dubuque, Iowa, which is a larger city. And it was a manager position, which I had got my degree in business management. And they wanted me to run the routes and not manage other drivers. I wasn't actually going to do much driving. And so that's what they wanted me to do, is 3 locations based out of Dubuque, Iowa. So it was a hard decision, because I always said I'd never work for anybody, but I could still work for my dad in the ice business. So I took it. It was because at first I was driving, it was an hour to work. And then I ended up staying and living in Dubuque. But I'm doing this, I'm running the family ice business, I'm developing my invention. And also I was selling real estate on the side to make extra money to fund my invention. So Did that, did Dubuque, but then within 5 months, I was actually managing 8 facilities, and they gave me a raise to take over another guy's position. So like all these different things happened along the way, which I didn't intend on. But so to answer your question, roundabout bay, so college is first, did the job, but the part you're probably referring to is when I got into college, I did more drugs and alcohol and partying than anybody because my GPA was 1.68. I got academic probation. I actually got kicked out of the dorms. There's like these people at the dorms where they like run the building, which usually they were interesting people. I'll just put it that. And he said, Brandon, I think it's best that you leave early. You're very disruptive for the rest of the building. I said, okay, sounds good. I did. And I wasn't sure if I was going to go back to college, and I did. And I realized that, hey, I need to focus on my grades. And because I didn't want to be the dropout that just went back and, oh, hey, daddy gave you the ice business. So I did follow through with college. But what happened in college that changed my life is I read this book. This is one of the versions. It's called Think and Go Rich. And so everybody should read the book. If you're a young listener, wherever you're at, this book changed my life. I was 20 years old. 20 years old. I read it. And it made me realize that anything's possible if you surround yourself with the right people and you have to pursue something. I realized I could do way more than the ice business. I could go and do whatever the frick I wanted in life. And so that book changed my life. And that's my biggest takeaway from college.
Oh, certainly. And I believe you mentioned Cactus Jack Behringer there. Was he the one who showed you the book as well?
Yes. Jack was the one, because I wasn't doing good in school. I always did extra credit to try to pass the classes. Like I did whatever I could to get a seat. And so speech comp 212, I was failing. Funny enough, because now people pay me to speak. I went to a presentation by Cactus Jack Behringer, and he mentioned the book. And so I read the book, and then he's the guy I eventually hired as a consultant. And so that's how I originally formed the relationship with Cactus Jack.
And so I'm fascinated about that like transformative experience in being introduced to the book and reading the book. Because, you know, I believe at sort of college at that time, you were sort of being a bit entrepreneurial in terms of maybe selling some some moonshine.
Selling some moonshine, that was me.
So it seemed that you were still sort of tapping into sort of elements of your upbringing in terms of the sort of entrepreneurial side. But I suppose what I'm really interested in is in that experience of sort of coming across the book and reading the book, was it almost like things kind of falling into place in terms of you felt like you sort of had the kind of puzzle pieces there and this book sort of just put them all together? Or was it in many ways a new experience in terms of it's almost like a different system of doing things that you really resonated with?
It opened up my thought process of what's actually possible. So before reading the book, I always knew I could be successful, but I never thought big enough. Like I didn't think I could, heck, I never thought about a TV show or even a podcast or any of that. I just thought, hey, I'm going to be the best in the ice business. I want to be the king of ice. And so the book made me realize it didn't matter if I sucked at grades. I wasn't the smartest book smart. What mattered is if I could, for once, surround myself with people that are way smarter than me and influential, found ways to add value to them. And if I could also create my own specialized knowledge in life, not only could I make money, but I could achieve anything I set my mind to. And the one story in the book was Thomas Edison. I think his highest degree of education was maybe elementary. And obviously, look at Thomas Edison, an inventor, made all these inventions. And so that made me realize that it didn't matter what my grades were. It didn't matter that I'm from a small town. What mattered is what I decided to do with moving forward. And so that's when I started thinking bigger, in which was an interesting stage of my life because I started saying things that most of my friends thought like that'll never happen. And so at first, when you don't see any progress, you do sound crazy and you almost like it seems so far away, like it's not possible. But as I started seeing the wins, and the first one was developing my own invention. I mean, it went from, it's pretty cool to see an idea in your head that goes to like an actual thing on paper that goes to a product you can buy and like a patent and all that. That's pretty cool. Even though take away the fact that I didn't make a lot of money with it, the fact that I did it is proof that like I took an idea and made it a real thing. And so that was cool for me. And so that's where I kind of started thinking bigger. And when you start doing one thing bigger, like it opens up the bigger things. So that opened up the doors to the fundraising, and then before I know I'm filming a TV show. And then before I know it, like I'm going on all these other shows and then I'm working with all these big names. And it was, again, it just happened because I made the decision to open my mind to what's possible. And then once you open your mind to what's possible, it can become possible. But the problem is most people, for one, don't leave the small town. Or if they do leave the small town, they never go and read a book like this or be introduced to a mentor that could give them an insight. And so they only know what they know. So I can tell you, I don't know where I would be if I never read the book, never met Cactus Jack. I might be still selling ice, breaking my back, and fucking maybe making decent money for where I live, but like not seeing the world, not traveling the world. I mean, before COVID, I was getting paid to travel wherever I wanted, and I would literally speak. Like the thought of speaking and making money and being brought in, like that was unknown to me. So yeah, it goes back to the book. It opened my mind.
It's interesting on the podcast, one of the things that we speak about a little bit is this idea from psychology. It's from a psychological model. We're talking about the idea that motivation equals importance plus confidence. And it sounds to me a little bit, and from, hearing a bit about your story and sort of some transformative experiences that have happened in your life, it sounds like in many ways you kind of had the importance there in terms of you had it sort of in the back of your mind that you wanted to sort of go on and do something else or go on and do something bigger, but you didn't necessarily have the confidence. And it seems to me a little bit like that book and certainly sort of your mentors that you've had and things that you've done throughout the life have in many ways been about sort of finding that confidence. And that is something that you now seem to have in spades in many ways.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm guessing you have a lot of listeners that are maybe young entrepreneurs or they're getting started. If there's one thing you take away from this is go read the book. Go pay $20, whatever it is, on Amazon. Read the book and be open-minded about it, and then live the book. And not just read it, but go back to it. Like I've read it a dozen times. Every time I read it, I get something differently. I've had obstacles in my life where when I was going through tough times, I'd go back to the book and read it as if it's my Bible, literally. And so I would get words and ideas that would come to me that would give me ideas to pursue. And there was times I'd read this book and I'd get an idea, then it'd make me a shit ton of money because I would take action on it. I just needed the book to give me ideas. And it made me think, okay, what's possible? And what could I do? And then I looked at what I had at my fingertips. And I just took action. And so the book is powerful. I mean, there's one guy, you know who Rob Dyrdek is?
Yeah, the skateboarder.
Yeah, skateboarder. So Rob's in the movie with us for Think Rich Legacy, and I like he's from Ohio, and he became a skateboarder, and he literally he started from nothing, and he went to LA. He like did skateboarding, then he did his own brands, and now he invests in companies. Very successful guy. And so when we were on the red carpet for the premiere, I asked him about the book, and he was just I loved it because I asked him, how has it changed over the years? He said the book is he would read it every year. He still does. And every time he reads it, he gets ideas. But he said it's so different as you age. So from when I read it when I was 20, it's how different now I read it when I'm 30. And same for him, I think he's 40 now. But every time you read it, you get something different. So that is just something I got to say, read the book. It's a starting point for anything. And in there, it actually gives you the open your mind to bigger things.
And it's funny you mentioned Think and Grow Rich, the legacy there. That's, I must admit, one of the first places that I came across you. And yeah, there we go. And James Whitaker, one of our mutual friends, was the author of that book. And it's something as well, I'd recommend everyone out there to read it because your story in that is absolutely fascinating to me. Because as we've spoken a little bit about, you obviously had that connection with Cactus Jack Beringer, who was obviously someone who was very sort of well established. You'd learn essentially crowdfunding and recognize that there was a sort of gap in the market for crowdfunding, that you could skill yourself up in that area and then offer value to other people. but there was a time when you had an offer, I believe, from Cactus Jack to work with him. I believe you had $750,000, obviously American, so in Australia, that's, astronomical. But
A lot of money.
yeah, but at the same time, you chose not to pursue that opportunity. So why was it that you chose not to go ahead with what many people would think was a brilliant opportunity that would potentially set you up for many years to come?
Yeah, and so there's a couple. So one, my gut feeling told me it wasn't gonna be right, and you should always trust your gut. But two, there was a lot of upside in the fact that I was relying a lot on Cactus Jack because he had the connections, he had the knowledge, he had it was relying on him. And so yes, I'm gung ho and everything, but I thought if I'm gonna do this, instead of taking a bunch of somebody's money, I should go and learn it myself and just learn the hard way. And obviously it'd be a long run. Don't get me wrong, it was hard when you have facing an opportunity for money and starting this business, everything, but there was too much potential upside on the or not upside. I would say there was too much opportunity for me to fail by taking it and going forward with it by not learning myself. Because it's one thing when you're learning with your own money, but you're taking somebody else's, you're making mistakes and learning from theirs. It's not, it's a different situation. And so that was tough for me to say no, not pursue it. And after spending months on this and telling him, hey, I'm going to buy these assets, we're going to go into business together. And then to say I can't do it, it was not a good situation. I mean, for a while there was kind of some negative energy between us. And we're friends now. Jack's amazing. Like he opened so many doors for me. But that was a tough come to Jesus moment because I knew what I had to do. And what I had to do, I knew it was going to be a short-term feeling of defeat and also like hardship. But I knew if I did go through with the deal long-term, in the long run, it would have hurt me. So that was tough. That was really tough. But if I wouldn't have done that, I would have never gotten to crowdfunding because after turning the deal down and not going forward with the company Adam's Product Innovation, I turned to what I knew. So what I knew was I have an invention, okay? I heard about crowdfunding. And I said, okay, to my girlfriend, wife now, why don't we do a crowdfunding campaign for this and launch a product? That's what we did. We raised 26 grand. We took the product to market. But while doing that, I saw there was a need to help other people raise money. I saw a bigger opportunity with crowdfunding than my invention ever could be. So what I started focusing more on was that aspect. So raising money. And that's where my doors open. Sometimes when we go after something in life, we're so focused on our baby, our idea. You just know sometimes there might be other things as you're pursuing it that are bigger than the thing we're going after, because not all the time is this idea going to become the reality. Even as hard as you work and as hard as I did, I mean, 3.5 years of work, over $100,000 invested into it, and telling the world that I'm this guy that's going to take this invention to market. It's hard to it's a part of your identity. So when you make that transition, it's not easy, but sometimes you have to swallow that tough pill and make the decision to do things that it hurts in the moment, but in the long run, it will actually help you. So sometimes we as entrepreneurs have to have the tough conversation with ourselves, or let our friends that are really our friends tell us, is this really the right thing you need to do? And so I think what happens is too many people don't make that pivot and they drive themselves completely into the ground and they lose it all.
Well, I'm fascinated by that because at that time that you made that decision, you were, I believe, 23 years old. I'm 27 now, sort of thing. And one thing, to me, one thing that really stands out about that is you seem to have had such sort of an awareness of your values and where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do. Was that kind of explicit at that time in terms of, you spoke about that sort of uneasy kind of feeling in your gut or whatever? Was that because you were sort of thinking, hold on, but these are, for example, the things that I want in my life and lifestyle, and it's not necessarily going to satisfy those? Or was it more of an intangible, actually, for whatever reason, this just doesn't resonate with me as much?
It doesn't resonate with me as much, but also I was going to be a product development company to help products go to market. when in reality, I didn't officially fully launch my own product. And so it's like, why would somebody hire me when they're relying so much on another person versus me? So it was set myself up for complete failure and too much reliance on one person, a part of the partnership. So it just didn't look good for me. And I'm so glad I never did it. I mean, it wouldn't have been good. And but I'm glad the opportunity presented itself, and it all turned out the way it did. I mean, man, I spent money on a lawyer. I think I paid a lawyer $5,000 and eats at me today, knowing I did that to literally get them to put the contract and agreement together. And I spent all this other money on this other stuff and time and energy. But see, most people, they would see that and like, hey, I already got this much into it. I can't turn back now. But no, turn back now so you don't go deeper. And then really, at the end of the day, you got to really ask yourself, what do you want? And so when you're making decisions in business, sometimes things might be sexy, especially as you start to find success and make money and you get like wins and you get so-called whatever fame or exposure. Everybody wants to work with you. Everybody's going to show you the next best thing. You have to learn you got to learn to say no a lot, and you need to learn of what you really want. If you know what you want, then you know what to say yes and no to. So I guess the big thing is learning exactly what you want, where you want your life to be. And when you know that, you have a better way of really making decisions on what things you say yes to, what things you don't say yes to. So for me, there's times in my life where there was one point where I didn't go on podcast shows because I was focusing on our TV show. Now I'll go on a lot of podcast shows. Like I can reach more people. I can talk to more people. I got a weekly TV show segment I do now. I got probably now a radio show segment every week. And so like I can reach more people. That's my focus. Because my goal is to impact as billion lives by 2029. And doing that through inspiration, motivation, education, through speaking, podcasting, all education, masterminds, events. So like that is my clear mantra. So by doing that, like knowing that, I know what to say yes and no to. I know that I will do this or I won't do this. I think that's a hard thing for people, is not knowing what they want. And you don't have to know it, but the only way to figure out to know what you want is by doing a lot of things. So like I did a lot of things. I found out what I was good at. I found out what I enjoyed doing. And then I eventually formed it into what I do.
Yeah, certainly. And one thing that fascinates me about that is obviously you started with crowdfunding because you saw a gap in the market in many ways in terms of that was somewhere you could provide value. But what you mentioned success in your city there, your TV show that you do with your wife, Samantha. In many ways, what you do now, I believe the mantra is helping people find their own version of success. So to me, I find that really interesting because in many ways, crowdfunding seemed to be the vehicle to get you to that, I suppose, more authentic, or authentically lived philosophy, if that makes sense.
100%. That's exactly what it did. Crowdfunding, I thought I wanted to build the biggest crowdfunding agency in the world. But I realized after doing that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. What I loved doing is helping people. I loved empowering people, speaking, and I loved being in front of the camera. And so crowdfunding, I used that talent to give me the things I really wanted. So, hey, one crowdfunding campaign got me a spot in a TV show. Another crowdfunding campaign got me in a movie, Think and Grow Your Legacy. And now I use those talents of crowdfunding and fundraising to get me on boards of companies, to get me stock in companies, to get me wealth. And so sometimes you use that talent to get the things that you want. It may not be your like one thing you want to do, but that is my way to generate the things that I really want to do. Figure out, everybody's got to find one specialized knowledge. What's one thing you can be the best at? And when you become the best at it, people will flock to you.
Certainly. And well, I'm fascinated now, just to finish up here, how podcasts fit into all this. Because as I mentioned before, it's one thing that I want to encourage people to at least consider what their podcast would be like. And even if it's not a podcast, it might be a script they want to write or a book they want to write or a product they want to put out there. But I'm fascinated about this idea of sort of finding your voice, projecting your voice into the world. And it seems to me that you really used podcasts as such a vehicle to, in many ways, kind of refine your sort of journey in terms of where you wanted to go and who you wanted to meet as well. Could you just speak a little bit to where sort of podcasts have fit into your development in that way?
Podcasting was the creation of everything. I mean, for me, I started podcasting in 2015. It was my way to build my own audience. At that time, you look at the first like 20 episodes of my podcast show, the sponsor was Arctic Stick. So I was going to promote my own product to my audience. And also, it was my way to connect with very influential people. So I utilized that to connect with people, to build real relationships with them, to do business with them. And as I grew my podcast, I started using my podcast to do my events. So my first major event in Iowa called Young Entrepreneur Convention, what I did was I got some of the past guests of my show as speakers, but I also promoted to my audience about the event. And then the event helped drive other things. And then I started doing more videos of my podcast. And then I realized, okay, then I went to the TV show. So I love podcasting. It's a game changer for anybody. And whether you even ever like monetize it, or even if you have not even a big audience, it helps you find your voice, helps you gain very valuable knowledge from other people, help you build relationships. And that's what I did. I used podcasting to build relationships, build connections, and do business deals.
Yeah, awesome. And that's where, like, to me, podcasting sort of fits into, whatever you want to do in that sort of sense, because you can kind of use it for whatever you want to do. And to me, in many ways, your podcast has been such a creative use of the medium in many ways, because it's not just about that, get an audience, get listeners, all this sort of stuff. And like one thing I'm fascinated by is, I believe, I might have checked it a couple of weeks ago now, but 58% of podcasts have less than 7 episodes. And so to me, that suggests that there's something about, whether it be people not recognizing how it sort of fits in with their goals, or not maybe recognizing what sort of the process involved in it is. But to me, obviously, it's been something that's given you so much in terms of that autonomy to be able to essentially pursue whatever you want outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at my stats. I got 421 episodes. So I definitely, I've done a few.
And of course, it's led you to be an Emmy Award winner in terms of TV. So would you say that's been maybe the most unexpected thing that's come out of your sort of journey so far?
100%. Like, I never saw that coming. I mean, I don't want to say I haven't saw it coming. Like 5 years ago, I saw it coming. But then once I was in it, I realized that was one goal, because I wanted to be the best in the space. That's one thing to accomplish, to basically show validation that you did it in that space. And that opened doors. I mean, that's credibility. It's like, hey, you did this, and that makes you very reputable, and people want to work with you because of that. So, and I paid the price. We both paid the price. We put a lot of time, money, and effort into creating an amazing piece of content that gave us that award. And so we earned every fucking bit of it. I'll tell you that. So.
Well, it seems to be a bit of a theme in terms of that hard work and perseverance idea. I believe in 2014 or 2015, you might have spent sort of 40 or 50 nights sleeping in your car, sort of doing the podcast and getting that going. So
Yep.
To me, you're someone who's been such a sort of inspiration to me in many ways, because, what this podcast is about essentially is kind of, recognizing what you want to do, what contribution you want to make to the world, and how you can involve others in that. And to me, obviously, you've been an example of how to do that. But even some of your philosophies that really come through on your podcast, in the way that, to me, it seems that your version of success involves lifting up other people, and it involves sort of essentially helping them recognize their success. And one of, I suppose, the themes of this podcast, I'm not sure if you've heard of the term co-elevation from Keith Ferrazzi. He's in his book Leading Without Authority. So, like, to me, that really kind of, I suppose, speaks to that notion of, if we can all sort of lift each other up sort of thing. It's that notion of a rising tide lifts all boats sort of thing. And to me, you're someone who really lives that.
Thank you, man. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, because that's what I'm about. It's like, how can we, through our mediums, podcasting, video, social media, or one-on-one interaction, how can we make each other better and empower others to be the best version of themselves? And everybody needs somebody to tell them it. I do, you do, we all do. And so my goal is to help as many people do that.
Certainly. Now, just one final one.
There may be some people out there listening to this who are in that situation that you were at 23 years old. They may have a bit of a gut feeling that they want to be going elsewhere, but may not necessarily have the confidence in terms of recognizing what exact steps there are to take to do that. Would you have some advice for someone who's in that position of maybe just recognizing there's something that doesn't fully resonate with their sort of values and what they want their lifestyle to look at, but they're not sure of how to take that huge step of essentially sort of jumping into the unknown and the abyss in many ways?
Yeah, I mean, like I've said, I've slept in my truck. I've done a lot of things most people would frown upon, or look at like you're crazy. But man, Dave, if it doesn't kill you, it's gonna make you stronger. Man, Dave, what's the worst that can happen? I always encourage people to go after something like, what's the worst that can happen if they lost a bunch of money? They got to sleep in their parents' couch, whatever. It may be embarrassing for a while, but whatever. If you always wonder what if, you'll have regret the rest of your life. And so I never wanted to be the what if guy. And so I always did what I wanted to do because I didn't want to wake up one day and be like, oh, what if I would have tried that? Or, I could have did this. No, just fucking do it. And so that's what I did. And I would say anybody out there, try different things. If you don't know exactly what you want, figure out what you want by trying different activities or whatever. And then once you kind of figure out what you want and you're ready to take the next step and be the best at it, find somebody else that's already become the best at it. And then work for them, learn from them, and become the best version in your own way with your own little tweak to it. So what I've done is I found different mentors that I wanted to be in some way. A couple of them I always think of is one is Kevin Harrington and one is Jeff Hoffman. They're both the executive producers of our show. They both have certain traits that I wanted to mimic. And Jeff Hoffman, he's a great communicator. He's obviously very wealthy, but he's a great communicator, storyteller, and he wants to give back to the world, and he gives back a lot. That's one thing I want to do. Kevin, also the same thing, but he's really good at business deals. He's really good at closing deals. He's really good at selling. And so I wanted to be the best. I wanted to mimic him. And so those two traits and characters are people that I want to become in my own life, morphed. And so they're both people I work with. So how do you become your ultimate version? Find somebody that's already there, because somebody's already walked on that path and they can help you avoid the obstacles.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Brandon. As I said, I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak a couple of times at different events, and to be able to sort of, get one-on-one and be able to pick your brain. As I say, you're one of many people, but certainly one who's inspired me to essentially be living the way that I want to live, in terms of this whole idea of lifting other people up and forming genuine relationships and looking to see sort of what we can do kind of in the world with the view of lifting other people up around us too. It's something I think if more people had that attitude, would be a lot better off.
100%, man. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited for seeing where your podcasting journey goes. We'll have to talk again in 18 months.
Certainly. Well, I could talk to you all day. So thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks, buddy.